Welcome to our study in the Gospel of Luke. We're in Luke chapter 4, so open there if you have not yet done so. Luke chapter 4. We were in the midst of Jesus being in his hometown synagogue. We're not going to go through everything that has transpired. If you have not been here, I think most of you have. But if you're watching online and have not seen the previous lessons together, I would suggest you go back to those. But Jesus has just read from the scroll of Isaiah, a messianic passage, and announced that he was the one who was there to fulfill that. By the way, I just heard something. I was listening to a podcast this week, something that relates to the passage that Jesus read. If you remember, I told you that this was Isaiah wrote this in the context of exiles coming back from Babylon, and that we expand that spiritually to the time of Jesus. But also, there is a sense in which it was literally still true that the exiles had not yet come back. Because if you remember, when those Israelites came back from Babylon to the land of Judah or Judea, not everybody came. Right. The book of Esther is predicated upon the fact that there were a lot of Hebrews still there in Persia. And in addition to that, of course, the 10 tribes of Israel that had been taken by Syria were still missing, were still gone. And so the person I was listening to was pointing out that for the Jewish people living at the time of Jesus, they would have considered themselves still looking for the exiles to come back, and that they would come back when Messiah came. So I thought that was interesting in relationship to what we had just looked at in Luke 4. Well, we know that after he read from the scroll of Isaiah and announced that the scripture was fulfilled by his presence there, that he then moved into the area that he knew was on their mind, and that is, are you going to do some miracles here? And he pointed out that God oftentimes does not work among his own people, especially if they're not believing, and instead works among Gentiles or even the enemy. And they perceived that he was talking about them as being equivalent to the old idolatrous Israel. And so I think that brings us up to verse 28. And we see that all the people in the synagogue were filled with rage as they heard these things. Verse 29, and they got up and drove him out of the city and led him to the brow of the hill on which their city had been built in order to throw him down the cliff. Interesting that the word in our translations is translated, they got up, is the same word used for resurrection. So we could say they arose. And what they do, they threw him out. The Greek word is ekbalo, is to throw out. They threw him out of the city. And that throwing out of a city is an expression used in literature as to be taken out of a city for execution. So that's kind of a technical term. To throw out of the city is to take them out to execute them. And we see that they led him to the brow of the hill on which their city had been built. Now, most of the times, let me point out, first of all, this word used for brow is also a medical term used for the eyebrow. And so, they use the physical features of a person to talk about geographic features. And so this was used over and over again in Greek literature for eyebrows or any protruding thing on a person's body as being a brow. And so also in Greek literature is used over rock and rock features that might look like a brow. One author says this concerning the particular brow here, or precipice in Nazareth. He says, most readers probably from these words imagine a town built on the summit of a mountain, because that's usually what happens. The town's built on the top of a hill, from which summit the intended precipitation was to take place. So we might imagine taking him outside the city and throwing over the edge of where the town is built. But he says in the case of Nazareth, that's not the situation. He says that's built upon, that is, on the side of a mountain, and the brow is not underneath, but over the town. And such a cliff as is here implied is found in the abrupt face of a limestone rock about 30 or 40 feet high, overhanging a convent that's there at this time. And so they took him up to the precipice which overhung the city to throw him off. And today that's called Mount Precipice in Nazareth. And you can see that if you go there. Now, their intent, of course, was to execute Jesus. Now, a couple of observations we might make about this proposed execution. First of all, it was without the required judicial proceeding. There had been no trial. They just rose up and said, we're going to kill this guy because we don't like what he's saying. Secondly, it was in a manner inconsistent with Jewish practice. Their four capital punishments were stoning, strangling, burning, and killing with the sword. Although sometimes, we have to admit, throwing over a precipice was something done prior to stoning. You know, once thrown over, then they would throw rocks at them. So it could be that they had that in mind. Thirdly, and maybe most importantly, it was on a day when it was illegal to enact such a sentence of death. Someone has written this: they do not inflict punishment on the Sabbath day, even though it is the punishment of an affirmative precept. They do not beat one that is guilty, nor put to death, as it is said, you shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day. This is a caution to the Sanhedrin that they do not burn on the Sabbath day he that is condemned to burning. And this is the law with respect to anyone that is liable to the other punishments. So it's part of Jewish tradition that you do not punish on the Sabbath day. And yet they were about to do that very thing. Now, the question might come to our minds: why do religious people reject Christ? Because this is the beginning of what we're going to see a lot of, and that is people that seem to be very religious are rejecting the Messiah.
They base their justification on their works, and on their personal achievement, of their personal views.
Yeah.
Submitting themselves to the righteousness of God and acknowledging their sinners in need of Christ.
Yeah, so part of what Joe is saying is that even though people are religious, they may appear to be religious, appear to be righteous, but they don't want to submit to the lordship of Christ. And we find that among people today. I mean, you can find lots of people that you know that may be outwardly religious, that even say they're religious or even say they're Christians, but they don't want to submit to the lordship of Christ. They're submitting to something else, and primarily themselves. And then the other thing that Joe mentioned, religious people reject Christ because they do not want to admit their sinful and desperate condition. They're self-righteous. They feel like they're good enough. I mean, you talk to the normal average person out there about sin, and what's their comment? Well, I'm not a sinner. I've never murdered anybody, right? I'm righteous on my own. I don't need someone else's righteousness. And so what is true of these people in Nazareth is true of people in general. And
look what happened to Stephen. You know, he pointed out to him, going through the whole history of everything, and they got so vehement with them, they dragged him out and stoned him.
Yeah, they actually were successful on that occasion.
Yeah,
to do that. All right, any other comments about these 2 points of why religious people reject Christ? All right, the next verse 30, brings to a conclusion this episode in the life of Jesus, this beginning of his ministry in Luke's gospel. He says, but passing through their midst, he went their way. Now, I would like to explain to you exactly what happened. Have you ever wondered that? Me too. I have no idea. How did he do that? I would like to explain it, but I can't. Was it a miraculous thing? Did he just, like a ghost, walk through there? Did he just by sheer force of his personality begin walking and they parted? I really don't know. And I haven't come across anybody that has explained that at least dogmatically as to what this.
I've always felt like he, just like he did in the book of John about the 9th chapter, when he was, you know, pointing out that they were the children of the devil. These people were murderous. They wanted to kill him and put their hands on him.
Mm-hmm.
I believe because he was God in the flesh, that he had the capacity to disappear and walk between them. They didn't even know where. How could someone, that a group of people, a mob that wants to kill you, lose sight of you, and you're able to just walk by and they don't do nothing to you?
Yeah.
I think he had to vanish, and I think he had the capacity to do so.
Yeah, that certainly is a possibility.
Or could just God have been protecting him, like, you know, with the lions. It just
could be like that too. They want to grab him and you know they couldn't get a hold of him.
They were just kind of frozen.
It wasn't his time yet.
Yeah, so however it happened wasn't his time for sure. What was that?
Their eyes were blinded with hate, so they didn't even see him.
Maybe that's just like the soldiers that were after Elisha.
Like in Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, they were
blinded. So you can see there are lots of possibilities here, and you know you can choose one. And no matter what, it was supernatural, right? That's the main point.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Bill.
Yeah,
I do know one thing, that they sought for miracles, but that's the only one they got.
Right.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But I like the goose thing. I like that.
All right. Any other comments? All right. We're going to begin a new section now. I hate to do that midway through the hour, but that's where we are. So we're going to begin at verse 31, and from verse 31 through chapter 6, verse 16, we find a section which we're calling the authentication of Jesus' Messiahship. So he's declared himself to be Messiah here in Nazareth. And now through the rest of chapter 4 and most of chapter 6 and all in between, he's going to authenticate his Messiahship, demonstrate that it is true. Now, and we can divide that up into several sections. The first one is that he does this through healing and teaching. And that is in the rest of chapter 4, through healing and teaching. And then subdivide that again to the very next part that we're going to look at, and that is through the healing of a demonized man. Now, we could subdivide that into some different parts too, but I thought you had enough subdivisions. So we'll just leave it at healing of a demonized man. So we come to verse 31. It says, and he came down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee. Now, Capernaum, you can see on the map here, is where this balloon is, compared to Nazareth, which is here. Now, you notice it says he went down to Capernaum. Why does it say he went down?
Down here, this way,
For the Sea of Galilee, why is that down? It's downhill. Yeah. Notice that Nazareth is up here in the mountains, and Capernaum is along the sea, which is not only lower than the mountains, but lower than the Mediterranean Sea. It's very low. So it's all downhill to Capernaum, and that's where he goes. And Capernaum now is going to become the headquarters of Jesus' ministry. As you can see, it's located on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee, which is around 680 feet below sea level. And Capernaum was the de facto Jewish capital of Galilee. In other words, it functioned as the Jewish capital of Galilee. Tiberias was the technical Roman capital. Tiberias is here. But this is what the Jews consider to be the central city of Galilee. Capernaum had not been in existence for a really long time at the time of Jesus. And the name either means town of Nahum, which you will recognize as one of the minor prophets, or more likely, the town of consolation or comfort. Now, when I read that, my thoughts immediately went back to what the prophet Simeon, what is said about him when the baby Jesus was brought to the temple, and said that he was awaiting the consolation of Israel, the comfort of Israel. So if that's what the name of the town means, I think it's very fitting that that's where Jesus' headquarters would be for the next few years. And we're told that he was teaching them on the Sabbath, teaching imperfect tense, indicating that was something that he was habitually doing. And as we saw before, that was his custom, to be teaching on the Sabbath. Only now he's in one synagogue, apparently, and teaching every week. He's their weekly Bible study leader in the synagogue. Verse 32. And they were amazed at his teaching. The word translated amazed, are there any other words in other translations besides amazed?
Astonished.
Astonished.
Doctrine.
What?
Doctrine.
I still didn't catch that.
Amazed at his
Oh,
doctrine.
yeah, I'm still looking for the word amazed. Any other? So astonished is that it literally means like you're struck by a blow. We could say they were knocked beside themselves at his teaching, or the word doctrine means the same thing as teaching. Now, what amazed them about the teaching of Jesus? What was amazing to them? What was
Without hypocrisy and with power, authority.
Yeah, his message was with authority. That was different. So how did that differentiate him from other teachers? Well, the predominant method employed in teaching at that time was to quote others before you, not to make pronouncements of yourself. So it was always quoting Rabbi so-and-so, Rabbi so-and-so, kind of like what I do sometimes, quoting people. But he spoke, someone says, as a legislator, not as a lawyer, not quoting people, but as the one who had the authority, because he's the one that gave the law to begin with. So he spoke without authority. And I don't know about you, but I think really we kind of crave that. We live in a time when there's maybe a reluctance to speak authoritatively from the Bible because people might not like it. And so pastors will skip over passages that are uncomfortable or not be very authoritative. Now, you can take that too far. I've heard pastors that are really authoritative over things over which they shouldn't be. But we need to be able to say, here's what God's word says, and we'll stand on that. And certainly Jesus did that. Any comments to that point or questions up through verse 32? All right, verse 33. We come to a situation. In the synagogue, there was a man possessed by the spirit of an unclean demon. Notice the combination of the word spirit and unclean demon, two descriptions of the same thing, a spirit of an unclean demon. The word unclean occurs 30 times in the New Testament. 24 of them apply to demons. John Gill, the famous Baptist pastor of the foregone era, quotes a Jewish source as saying, Satan and the evil demon flee on the Sabbath day to the mountains of darkness and do not appear all the Sabbath day, because that day is holy and they are unclean. But in the evening of the Sabbath, they prepare themselves and meet the children of men and hurt them. Now, here we find that not being the case. Here's an unclean spirit, a demon, in the synagogue on the Sabbath. And possibly Luke specified that this was an unclean demon because, remember, he's writing primarily to Greek people, and the Greeks thought that there were good demons and evil demons. So he's making certain they understand this is an unclean demon. Now, what is a demon? R.C. Sproul relates that G.C. Berkouwer, and this was in a lecture he heard him giving, once commented that there cannot be any theology without demonology. Sproul goes on to say, the New Testament so clearly propounds the idea of the reality of the demonic world and of the angelic world, populated by supernatural beings who are usually invisible to us, but nevertheless are real and powerful. The New Testament speaks more often about angels, and we'll talk about later the relationship between angels and demons. They're both of the same supernatural makeup. Speaks more about angels than it does about love or even sin. Like it or not, the Christian faith contains an affirmation of an angelic realm where not all the angels are good and righteous, but some are fallen and are of the minions of Satan, unquote. So I thought we'd take a little bit of time because there may be some that are not as aware of these issues as others, and look at the idea of demons and demonology. First of all, are demons real? Although they're not called demons in the Old Testament, in fact, you might hear people say demons aren't mentioned in the Old Testament. You're not by that name, they're not. But there are supernatural beings in the Old Testament that have other names. And there are several different ones named in the Old Testament by their name. There are the satyrs, or hairy ones, possibly they're goat demons. There is the Shadim, to which sacrifices were made, similar to Moloch. There is Lilith, the female night demon. There is Azazel, the demon of the desert, which is the name of the chief demon in First Enoch. Psalm 91 have personifications of pestilence. Isaiah 13 and 34 list several desert animals as a way to show the desolation of destroyed places. Some assume the list includes the demonic to illustrate that those destroyed places are also haunted. And then there's also Elohim, Gad, and Keter. So those are some of the names that are used in the Old Testament for these supernatural beings that are evil. And the New Testament, particularly the Gospels, mention demons or the synonymous devils numerous times, as you know. All right, so that's the fact that there are demons. We won't go into all the modern day examples at this point, but there have been demons in the Old Testament times. There certainly were during the time of Jesus, and there are demons today as well. Yeah, Dave.
Just to think about demons, you know, it says that there are angels, and somewhere I think it's in Genesis they think about myriads and myriads of angels, and that myriad is like innumerable.
Yeah.
So there's innumerable angels, and a third of those innumerable angels fell and became demons. So there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
I mean, just in perspective, there's a lot of demons out there floating around.
Yeah. Yeah. If you have any doubts, go to Washington, D.C. No, I'm just kidding. May or may not be true. All right, so Dave's kind of taking us to the next step, and that is what's the origin of demons? Where do they come from? And there are, believe it or not, there are some different ideas about this. The one is that there are a pre-Adamic race. Oh, first of all, let me say that modern observers simply think that demons are a primitive way of explaining natural illnesses. Well, they couldn't tell where a fever came from, so they said it must be a demon. And so they dismiss those ideas about demons as being just, you know, ancient folklore and superstition. But you can readily see that that is not the case when you observe that in the New Testament, demons are demonstrate their own personalities. They speak, they have names, etc. Dave, what were you going to say?
Out, foul spirit.
What?
In the co-charismatic things, when someone had a fever or sick, out, foul spirit.
Oh, outfall spirit. Yeah. Yeah, and some go to the extreme where even today where they see them everywhere.
Everywhere.
But aside from that, there is the pre-Adamic race idea that these were disembodied spirits of some race of men that was created before Adam and fell, and that fits into the whole gap theory and all that stuff, which we'll get into. And then somehow all those spirits now are embodying men. Then there's the idea that they are bred of angels and women. This goes back to Genesis 6, that the coming together of angels and women brought about demons. That they're spirits of evil men. This is interesting that this was a predominant Jewish belief at the time of Jesus. Josephus relates it, and I believe Philo, the Jewish philosopher, too, that wicked men, after they died, their spirits would enter the bodies of the living to kill them. Of course, that can't be, because the Bible declares that the unsaved dead are in Hades and not roaming the earth. We don't find that anywhere in the Bible that the dead spirits are roaming the earth. And so the predominant viewpoint of most evangelicals today is that they are fallen angels, as Dave has already stated. That seems to be the most logical conclusion. Jesus described Gehenna, the lake of fire, as the eternal fire which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. And as Dave mentioned in Revelation, John seems to indicate that Satan took with him in his rebellion 1/3 of the angels of heaven. That's Revelation 12:4. So it must be admitted that there is now no actual specific statement in this regard of the Bible. It seems to be the most logical way to put the different ideas together. All right. Any comments or questions about where they come from, the origin of demons? All right, what are the characteristics or the nature of demons? First of all, they are spirits who can manifest themselves visibly. So they can't create a human body, but they can appear as a human in body, or even an animal. And I'm tempted to tell stories, but I won't.
Go ahead.
No, it's too many. It would take too long. Secondly, they are morally perverted in several ways. They're morally perverted in their persons. They are perverted in their doctrine, what they teach, in their conduct, and their conduct is evidenced in two major ways. First of all, through opposing God and his program. And there are 5 ways in which they do that: promoting rebellion, positing slander, promoting idolatry, rejecting grace, and promoting false religions and cults. In those ways, in their conduct, they oppose God and his program. Anybody need any explanation or elucidation on any of those items, or if you'd like any comments you'd like to make on any of that conduct?
I just believe that they are rampant in this age. All these things are happening right now.
Yeah.
It's just awful.
But it could be that they have promoted that, and so other people are just following that. You know, not everybody that's doing these things is a demon, I don't think.
Yeah, right. Because man is evil by nature too. And so they follow right along with whatever is being promoted by demonic activity.
Also, isn't it interesting he was in the synagogue? He didn't go there to be healed.
Right.
No.
All right, and their conduct is perverted not only in opposing God and his program, but also through oppression of mankind. And this comes through distressing men through nature. In other words, sometimes demons use nature to go after humans by degrading man's nature by distracting from the truth, by disabling the body, by deranging the mind, by driving injury, by destroying life, and by dominating individuals. Let me just touch on deranging the mind. And I have to be careful not to go into a long explanation. There's a man by the name of Jay Adams, who just died a few years ago, I believe, that was very interested in pursuing counseling from a biblical perspective, something that wasn't being done back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And so he studied the Bible in order to have an answer. But also studied psychology so that he knew what was going on. And he said from his personal experience, he went into mental hospitals and through and determined through, I guess, his own spirit and through biblical guidance that a number of the people that were in mental institutions were actually demon possessed. And through the counsel of God's word, he was able to bring healing to them. And it just, you just wonder how many people that are mentally ill, supposedly mentally ill according to psychology, have nothing wrong physically with their minds. And that could be. I mean, there are physical problems that people can have in their brains. But how many of people that have deranged minds are so because of demonic activity? But in our culture, we would never admit that and never approach that. And please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying, go around every mentally ill person and say, try to exercise the demon out of them. I'm not saying that at all, but it's something certainly we ought to consider. Any comments or questions about any of those different oppressions? All right, let's go to the personalities of demons. In other words, they do have personality. It's not just some force or something out there. They have names, and we can see that in several places in the New Testament. And they speak, as we see here and in other places. They possess intelligence. They experience emotion. They possess great strength. They evidence volition or will. And they are morally accountable. So those are all indications that they have personality. I don't mean they're life of the party kind of, I mean that they do have indications that they are persons. All right, any comments or questions about any of these?
I will attest to the great strength. I was in a situation with a little lady that was being possessed. Oh. And she threw large men across the room. Mm. So they are pretty strong.
Yeah. And we can see that in the New Testament. I think of the man who broke the chains. That had legion within him.
Did you throw her back? No. Good throw her back.
All right, let's go to the activities of demons. We kind of touched on that somewhat in their conduct, but more specifically, demons bring about physical illness. In fact, Dr. Darrell Bock says a distinguishing feature of demon possession is erratic behavior or severe physical distortion. Not only illness, but doing things with their bodies that are not possible to be done normally. I don't know if I'll ever have a chance to talk to you about the Salem witch trials, but there was a lot of that going on in Salem, where the girls that I believe were demon possessed, their heads were turning all the way around, and a lot of things that you think of in relationship to The Exorcist. But the things in The Exorcist are based on real life too, even though I wouldn't recommend the book or the movie, but it was based on something that really happened.
Bill,
Yeah.
where it talks about in Romans, I think it's in Romans 1, talks about the reprobate mind.
Mhm.
You think that has anything to do with, we're a couple of slides ago about the mind?
Yeah, I get the sense, I've never thought of it that way, but I get the sense from what Paul's saying in Romans 1 that this is something that it naturally occurs in man because of their rejection of God, not something imposed from demonic forces. That might be part of it, but I think primarily he's telling people, you know, if you're responsible because God gave you over to the mind that you wanted to have. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think rather than saying, well, the devil made me do it.
It seems like, well, follow the progression of the sin that takes place and you get to that spot.
And people do open themselves up to demonic activity too. So because they want it, and so
drugs open you up to the
Yep.
demonic
Yep.
oppression or possession.
Yep. And of course, mental impairment, we've already talked a little bit about that. Moral impurity, the spread of false doctrine, you see that indicated by Apostle Paul. The demons are behind false doctrine. And spiritual warfare, we see in Ephesians 6. And then the idea of possession itself, or the New Testament word is demonized. A person is demonized. That's what we would call possession. And I think that most evangelical Bible teachers would make a distinction between possession and oppression. So the person is possessed, they are controlled totally by the demon. If a person is oppressed, that means the demons are attacking them. And any Christian can be oppressed.
Right.
In fact, I will tell one story because I think it's germane here. A guy I knew when I was in college, before he became a Christian, had been a spiritist. He had been involved in seances and contacting spirits. When he became a Christian, the demons, the spirits with whom he had been engaged, did not like that he had turned away from them and neglected them. And he said that for, I don't remember how many nights it was, laying in bed, he would hear knocking on the walls all around him all night long. The radio would come on full blast, all this stuff to go after him, to oppress him. And at some point, he declared, in the name of Jesus, be gone. Whatever word he said like that, and it didn't bother him anymore. But they were oppressing him, bothering him. They couldn't possess him, but they were oppressing him. And I think that many people could probably tell tales of demonic oppression.
Bill, when I first came to the Lord when I was 15, I went to bed one night and I was laying in my bed and I just felt this evil just kind of came into the room and I was pushed down in my bed. Because I was in my bed and I could see the mattress up above me here.
Wow.
And so that does happen. They're not happy when you receive the Lord or make a change in your life. They're not happy at all.
And I would say not happy if you are proclaiming something that is life-changing. I can tell you a time when I felt the oppression of demonic forces. One time in a church I pastored before I was going to deliver my message that day, I met together with the elders for prayer before the service. And I told them, I said, I really need you guys to pray because I feel such a dark presence that just does not want me to give this message today. I could feel it and asked them to pray. Now, I wonder what you would guess would be the subject matter that these demonic forces did not want me to communicate.
Spiritual warfare.
Salvation.
No. Forgiveness. And that day, after the message, a man in our congregation got up and expressed forgiveness to another man in the congregation for something that that man had done to the first man's family. Something a terrible thing that the other guy had become a Christian since, but that this guy said, I forgive you. And it was very difficult for him to do, but the Lord worked because of that. And anyway, won't get too far afield here. Let's look at, and you can look at what it says on the screen there for definition of demon possession. I'm not going to read through all that and glance through there. Comes from Ryrie Study Bible. Let's look now at symptoms of demon possession. And this is contrasting with mental illness because people try to equate the two, or saying a demon is that, well, it's just mental illness, they're just crazy, it's not really a demon. All right, so first of all, you might see an alteration of voice. Another thing that you might see is clairvoyance, being able to perceive things or events in the future. You might see speaking in foreign languages. I had a personal experience at a church that we were attending in another area. And the pastor was not there that Sunday, had a guest speaker, and it was a woman, and she was relating her experiences or whatever. And apparently she had some groupies that follow her there. And so, she gave this invitation to come be filled with the Spirit or something. It was a very charismatic kind of thing. And a woman went up there and knelt down and began speaking in tongues. And I can't prove this. And it's not like that's the first time I've ever heard anybody speak in tongues, but it is the first time that ever fell in my spirit. This is demonic. This is not God. She's not even just making stuff up. This is demonic. And I just felt such a burden within me of that. And I don't know, did you feel that too?
Oh, it was really creepy.
Yeah, and so we both got up and left. And we never went back to that church for a long time.
That was not God doing.
Yeah. So speaking in foreign languages is possible. Occult transference also occurs. That is, demonic activity emerges within another person present when leaving the original sufferer. So you think about the man that had the legion and Jesus cast them out. They went into pigs. They go somewhere. And if a demon is exorcised from a person, if there's another person there who does not know the Lord, that demon will go into that person. Kurt Koch was an expert on this kind of stuff. I mean, not a wacko charismatic like some are. He really knew what he was doing, and he told about a boy in Germany who accompanied his father to an exorcism, and when they exorcised the demon out of the boy they came to deal with, it went into his son, and he was affected because he was not a believer. Father didn't even know that he wasn't along. So that happens. So there's no transference of mental illness. If you get a person mentally ill, well, it doesn't go into somebody else. And then there's also instantaneous deliverance, which again doesn't happen with mental illness or most diseases. When the demon is exorcised, it is instantaneous. All right, our time is up for today. So next week, we'll go back to anything that anybody wants to address here. This is a difficult subject, I know, and it can be really freaky, but it's important for us to understand, and especially understand what Jesus is dealing with. Next week, we'll talk briefly about the idea of can Christians be possessed. So be thinking about that, or reading about it and see what you may want to talk about there. Maybe a short discussion, maybe long. Yeah, Dave?
Ginny just made a good point here. It's good to know some of these things as we come into Halloween.
Oh,
Halloween's just not all fun and games.
Yeah.
There is a dark side
to
it that the devil sits behind that whole thing.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a couple of base groups I'm part of that are day trips in Ohio and stuff, and I'm surprised how many people ask, I want to go to a haunted house, where can I go to this? Or they'll tell where to go to one. I really think that's dangerous.
Yeah. Oh, let me tell you this. In our newspaper, one of our local Historical Society had put a blurb in our Morning Journal newspaper that they were having an event in the cemetery for, we have an old stick chapel in our cemetery that's in need of refurbishing. So they're raising money for it and trying to get people to donate time and money and things for it. But in the activities of the day, you know, there were different things like hay rides, and there were different people that were going to be standing by their father who was in the war. They explained this, you know, the story of them. But there was also going to be a medium present for different things.
Wow.
And Jenny was so worked up about it, she wrote a letter and talked to a couple of the people who were involved in this in the Historical Society, that they have dropped the medium from the event. Yay.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me make one statement about all of that, that so many of you aware that when mediums contact spirits of dead people, those are not spirits of dead people. Those are demons impersonating dead people. And if you need more verification of that, I can tell you stories as well. But
I always been confused about
demons.
When Saul contacted, the Bible made it clear that specifically was the prophet that was supposed to.
Right.
Maybe God permitted it for that.
Yeah, at one time, and God brought, and the medium was surprised.
Yeah.
She didn't expect that to happen. So most of the time it's chicanery, but there are times when spirits do appear, and those are demons. Okay, well, a happy thought to end with. Maybe your happier thoughts in what we're going to be looking at afterwards, the creation of man and woman and all that. So
extra credit this week if you run out and cast out a demon. No, come back and tell us. We'll give you some points.
And what will you give them, David?
A star.
A star.
A star.
All right. Thank you. Dismissed. See you in the auditorium.